want to point you to a posting on davidicke.com this week, if you haven't seen it. It's, let me pull it up. It's Robert Kennedy, JFK Jr., and it's a speech he made about vaccines, because, of course, he's been one of the great advocates in America of questioning the official narrative about vaccines. Of course, the vaccine agenda is massive, not just for the money that it generates, but a much bigger and deeper and more sinister agenda even than that. And this is why you're seeing people that are questioning vaccines being more and more suppressed through the internet giants, the professional censors for their masters in the shadows. But this is a really great speech. And if you go to davidicke.com and you put in Robert Kennedy Jr. exposes vaccines, you'll get it on the search engine, and it's worth watching because of the information that he communicates. And coincidentally, I'm reading a book at the moment, which is an outstanding book by an American doctor, family doctor of long time standing. It's called Vaccines, a Reappraisal. And it's devastating in what it reveals about the real background to vaccines. I mean, how many people know that, when they do drug trials, they have this standard technique of giving the drug to a group of people and then giving a placebo without telling them to another group of people who think they're taking the drug, and then seeing the effect on both. And when you've got a control group that hasn't had the drug, it allows you much more clearly to see the effect in whatever way on the control group that has taken the drug. It's absolute basic drug science. They don't do that with vaccines. When they have tests, which are invariably paid for by the pharmaceutical industry, to elicit the result that they want, they have one control group that has the vaccine, and the other control group doesn't have a placebo. It has another vaccine or combination of vaccines. And that's what they call testing. The book also reveals the explosion of autoimmune disease in the vaccine era, and particularly in the era when the vaccine numbers of vaccines have gone through the roof. It reveals how the figures of death by vaccine, brain damage by vaccine, and lifelong health problems from vaccine are suppressed. And of course, autoimmune disease is the immune system attacking itself in effect, attacking your own body. And this happens because of the toxic ingredients and DNA ingredients and other unbelievable ingredients in vaccines, including aluminium, which the immune system takes to be a threat to the body. And because some of these substances attach themselves basically to the immune system itself and the cells of the immune system, it starts attacking itself. And this has exploded. So has autism. When someone, and there are many instances of this, when someone is given a vaccine who's perfectly okay, and it almost immediately afterwards, sometimes immediately afterwards, they show signs of autism. Well, it's kind of obvious what's caused the autism. But of course, the authorities that are just fronts for the drug companies and the medical profession, ditto, just resist it and call it a coincidence. Well, actually, I've just tripped up on a brick and fell on my face. Oh, it's coincidence. Nothing to do with the brick. And the number of long-term disease children, particularly in America, where they're the most vaccinated children on earth, is going through the roof, as is brain damage in various forms. And this is why they are shutting down alternative information, what they've dubbed anti-vaxxers, on the internet. You know, when information stories about vaccines are posted on my Twitter account, people say, come on, oh no, we're going to report this man to Twitter. What? For having a different view of vaccines to you? And it's condemning children to death. It's condemning them to brain damage. It's condemning them to long-term, lifelong health problems. And that's a fact. When you have, and this is what mandatory vaccines are condemning them to, when you have a group of children who, given the choice, given the parental choice, are not being vaccinated, and then mandatory vaccination forces them to be vaccinated, the figures are clear that a proportion of those children that are forced by mandatory vaccinations to be vaccinated are going to suffer death, brain damage, and long-term health problems. It's a fact, statistical fact. But this mustn't be explained to people, because it's bad for the pharmaceutical industry. And of course, like I say, it's not just about money, though it's certainly about that. It's also about what's in the vaccines and what they're doing. Because, you know, people need to realize and appreciate the scale of evil and psychopathy that's actually behind all this. And, you know, this reaction of they would never do that is a big block on people absorbing the fact that they are doing that and they would do that. So this this speech by Robert Kennedy is excellent, and so is this book that I'm reading, Vaccines: A Reappraisal. It's every parent should read it. It's by a doctor called Dr. Moskowitz. I haven't got it in front of me now. It's in my car, because what I do is when I go out and have a cup of tea at a cafe or something, I always have a book with me. I'm an incessant reader, and I'm reading it a chapter or two chapters every day. And what I do when I'm reading a book is I always have a highlighter with me, and I highlight irrelevant parts that I want to encompass in my work, and then I write on the top or bottom of the page the subject that page is talking about. And I've been doing this for 30 years, but never in all that time have I highlighted so much of a book. It's incredible stuff. Like I say, every single parent should read this book, and if they do, the number of children being vaccinated would absolutely plummet. It's a war on children. That's what vaccinations are, and it's time that people understood that, for their children's sake as well as their own. And just to give you an idea of the mentality of the big pharma cartel, which is truly evil. It's one of the biggest killers, if not the biggest killer on earth. And when I say the biggest killer on earth, um, I'm talking compared with other major killing diseases like cancer and heart disease, right up there. And indeed, when you take into account that most vaccine deaths and most drug deaths don't go down on the death certificate as what actually caused it, but some other reason, you can start to appreciate the true scale of mortality that's coming from the big pharma cartel. It's the biggest killer on earth. And just an example, what this book is pointing out is that so many drug deaths and vaccine deaths and vaccine damage is written off as unknown cause. And the classic example of that is sudden infant death syndrome, what they call SIDS, where a baby just dies. And they say, oh, we don't know what's happened, so they call it sudden infant death syndrome. Well, as this book points out, the evidence is extremely compelling that a lot of these kids dying in their cots at a very young age are dying because of the vaccines. You know, you're hardly out of the womb now before you're hit by this vaccine deluge. You haven't even got a proper immune system at that time. And also, how many people know that the American drug companies have been given immunity from prosecution by the American government? So they can't be sued for the effects of their vaccines. And since that immunity was given, the number of vaccines has absolutely soared because they've got nothing to lose. And as Kennedy points out, there's well over 100 other vaccines waiting in the shadows to be introduced. This is one of the key agendas. And because of this gathering resistance to it, this is where the censorship of anti-vaccine information is coming from. Because this is how freedom works. This is how freedom of speech works in this system. If you say things that the system wants people to hear or isn't bothered if they hear, then you have the freedom to say them. If you say things that they don't want people to hear, you don't have the freedom to say them without consequences. That's the freedom of speech definition of these people. And it's the same with whether something's mandatory or choice. As long as you make the choice that the system wants, you have choice. When you don't make the choice the system wants, that choice is taken away. This is what's happening with vaccines, of course, with the gathering mandatory vaccination campaigns around the world, not least in the United States. And the one in California, you know, free, liberal California, that has made vaccination mandatory. It was led by a guy called, a state senator called Pan, Richard Pan. And he takes money from the pharmaceutical industry. And how many dead children, brain damaged children, and health damage for life children in California is this guy Pan responsible for, who are being vaccinated under mandatory law that wouldn't have been vaccinated otherwise? Over a period of time, it will be a very large number. Does he care? Couldn't give a damn. So it's very worthwhile just watching that Kennedy speech because it's It's very interesting. And here's another story from this week about vaccinations. Kind of an ironic one, really. Leading cancer expert, 67, who treated Jane Goody. She was a well-known reality TV personality for people around the world in Britain, and was praised by Prince William, died after 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 100,000 reaction to a yellow fever jab, inquest hears. And, you know, see what you've got in that headline. The story is that this leading cancer expert, guy called Professor Martin Gore, died as a result of a vaccine. That's the story, which would give people the feeling that, hey, vaccines are not that safe, are they? They're not completely safe as we're led to believe. But what they've put in the headline there is after 1 in 100,000 reaction, which is saying, actually, you know, it's so rare it's not even worth bothering with. I wonder if the family of Professor Martin Gore thinks it's so rare that it's not worth bothering with. This guy was traveling to Tanzania for a week and had the vaccination in London and died after being admitted to hospital 8 days later. And that's another point that this book points out, is that the period in which it's accepted as a possibility the vaccine was involved and the reactions that are reported are limited to something like 14-day periods, when the effect on the body of a vaccine, the effect on the mind of the vaccine, can take weeks to impact itself. And another thing is that you can have a vaccine and it can start to have some effects on your health and your mind. And then instead of saying, okay, well, you haven't reacted very well to the first vaccine, so we're going to give future vaccines a miss. No, got to have the second vaccine. So they have the second vaccine, and what happens? They then have full-blown brain damage or even death and long-term health problems. There are many examples in the book of this, where warning signs after the first vaccine have simply been ignored, and when the second vaccine hit, bang, full-blown whatever the problem was, which often is irreversible. So it's an extraordinary story of this vaccine evil, which is perpetrated on the children of the world.